Welcome to All Politics Are Local Extra. I am very honored today to have as a guest Junius Williams. I've been a fan of Junius Williams' work for many, many years. He's a community activist. He was involved in Newark as early as the Newark uprisings in '67, and he has been a staple within the community, doing all kinds of community advocacy work behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, for years. He also founded the Abbott Leadership Group, and the Abbott leadership has trained generations of community activists. So he's a community activist who believes in educating and training that next generation of community activists. He is currently the historian for the city of Newark. And in addition to that, he is a fellow at the Newark Public Library. So thank you so much for coming on our show. Thank you for being here. Honored to have you.
Thank you for having me as well, and thank you for that nice introduction.
No, again, the honor is all mine. We always start off the show talking about what our guests think of the current political moment that we're in. And we're in a really interesting political moment. We're all doing this from COVID. We have a presidential election coming up, and we have a series of protests that are going on around the country. We see some situations that are evolving in Portland, where there's like this new type of quasi-national police force that's being developed. We see them threatening to go into Chicago and against many people, the politicians and activists who are there that don't want them. And this also threatens to come to Newark. What do you think about the current situation of our politics right now? Like, how do you see what's going on now?
There's lots of aspects, lots of phases. You mentioned the demonstrations that are continuous throughout the country. I think in Portland, this is the 62nd or 63rd day of protest. Well, it's not unparalleled because 50 years ago, those young people were us. There is a difference. I think the leadership on purpose is diffused. We had recognizable leaders, and therefore the advantage of having that was you kind of knew who was doing what. A lot of the young people in the street now are under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter, and I believe they are trying to bring this together so that there can be a little more cohesiveness. That's the word I want, cohesiveness. We need that. I don't care about the leadership form. You can hide the leaders if you want to keep them safe, or if you don't believe in one single leader, that's fine. I believe in that too. But at the same time, there has to be a cohesive approach, not to mobilize necessarily, but to strategize. We can talk about strategy a little bit later, if you will. Now, on the other side, you've got the president of the United States, who has taken it upon himself to organize his return to the White House, showing that he is against these people. He calls Antifa, or the anti-fascist people, he calls them outlaws, while the real outlaws, who are the fascists, the Ku Klux Klan and various other groups like that, he calls them friends. So it's going to be a question of who can bring the most people to the ballot box in November. Now, he has a lot on his side because you see the Democratic Party allowed the Republicans under Obama, when Obama was president, to take over many of the state's apparatus through state legislatures. Many of them are Republican. I don't know how many, I think it's 37. So they set the rules for voting. That, in addition to the pre-clearance process having been destroyed under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, he has an upper hand. So you have in places like Louisville, Kentucky, with its millions no, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of people. There was only one voting station in the last election. Even the Democrats are not completely innocent because in California, there were long lines for people waiting in the primary. So both sides are playing that we can outweight you game, hoping that people will have little patience, little discipline, and will not come in and vote. But it really doesn't matter what the polls say. It's going to be a matter of who can bring their people out and who can keep their people in line. I have a little more to say on that, but I'll stop now and
Well,
let you do something else.
well, one of the things that you said that you wanted to talk about was the concept of strategy.
Mm-hmm.
What did you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by strategy, especially in situations like this?
It seems that the new people who we were some time ago has decided that they're going to keep people in the street. Well, that is a necessary, but it is not a sufficient strategy. Uh, there are many things that need to be done. People need to think about boycotts. People need to think about elections. Uh, One of the things we did when I was them, uh, my strategy was as follows. There was a highway that was supposed to go between Route 280 and Route 78. It was called the Midtown Connector, and it was supposed to go straight through the center of Newark, which would have been terrible because several more thousand people would be displaced. There'd be another barrier to formation of communities, and you can go on and on and on. So they had heard about me because I was involved in the medical school fight, which is another one of those things where we changed the strategies on them.
And what year was this? What year are you talking about?
For the highway, we're talking about 1969.
Okay.
So I called the highway department man and said, we want to come down and talk about the highway. So he said, all right, we're going to have a meeting. I didn't tell him how many people were coming. He assumed just a few people. And in reality, only a few came. I took a busload of white ministers and Black Panthers down to the Department of Highways, Department of Transportation. We closed the door, locked the door. The Panthers and some of my organization folks, the people from NAPA, the Newark Area Planning Association, got up on that nice oak table and told these people, under no circumstances will you build a highway. They listened. They were scared to death. And at one point, I just called it off. And sure enough, the state police were gathering on the outside. But based on that show of discontent, shall we say, they decided 2 weeks from then, I got a call which said, Mr. Williams, we decided we don't need that highway after all. So it was a different kind of strategy. I didn't try to bring hundreds of people down. I'm not so sure I could have gotten hundreds of people at that point because people were thinking about the election of who was going to be the first Black mayor at that point. And there were other things going on. So I decided that there had to be a different kind of strategy to use. And we went small and we got the results that we want. Now, people have to do some of that thinking as well. You just can't keep putting people out in the street. Why? In this case, you asked me to talk about Portland. And we have a lot of people in the street, but that justifies having a lot of police in the street. If you don't have people in the street, you don't need police in the street. And if you do put the police in the street, they're going to look silly. So maybe there's something else ought to be happening in Portland. I'm not there. I can't tell the people what to do, but I think it's time to think of something a little bit different and still make your point.
Okay, and so when you were talking about what happened in 1969 and how you organized a group of white ministers and Black Panthers to come into a room and take it over, to come into an actual state office and take it over, and just through a show of, hey, I don't think that's a good idea, and have them all there and change policy that way. where did you start to get that idea and some others, right? Like we're talking about 1969. When did you come? When did you come into Newark? Like when did you come to Newark, and why did you first start getting involved in the city?
Well, the idea came from the fact that, let's remember the context. I can't take credit for all of that. The potential that was there. I remember we had the rebellion in 1967, and that was still on people's minds, although it was gradually receding into the distance. We used that same invisible brother with the brick to join us at our confrontations over the medical school.
You said invisible brother. What was that statement? What was that phrase?
I call him the invisible brother with the brick.
The invisible brother with the brick. Okay.
Who was constantly in the room when we negotiated the medical school agreements. The medical school agreements were designed to give Black folks and Latinos that were Puerto Ricans at that time a chance. They thought we were just going to come in there and blow off steam like they do nowadays at the Board of Education and the City Council. But no, we had a negotiating team. And that negotiating team was composed of 9 people, broad breadth of folks from different organizations, essentially in the Black community. And we had studied and knew what we wanted. One, we wanted to cut down on the size of the medical school from 150 acres. We negotiated. We had one of my stratagems was to use an alternate plan. So I was at Yale Law School at the time. I had taken a course at the architectural planning school. So I went over and talked to my friend, the professor Pat Girders, and I said, "Can you design a school that does the same thing they want and that takes a smaller footprint?" And they said, "Bet." So using American Medical Association standards, they came up with a plan that took 19 acres. Now, of course, they were going up. The thing they wanted was going out. And so I came back with that plan, and it was a physical plan. It was well done. And we called a press conference at my office in Napa down on South Orange and Bruce Street. In addition to that, I got the Legal Defense Fund to come over and send a lawyer to file an administrative complaint because there weren't sufficient houses to hold these people, and that was against the law. So we knew we had them legally. We just had to get everybody on board. We knew that the rebellion had occurred and they were scared. So this alternate plan gave all the way from the NAACP and the Urban League, all the way to the other side to SNCC and whatever militant organizations there were. And yes, 19 acres or no medical school. So we, to make a long story short, we had this team of people, and we sat down, and over a period of months, we ironed out, number one, you're going to take less land. They got 60 acres of land. We got 60 acres of land. And those houses are still standing, like New Hope Village and some others such as that. We said you got to integrate that workforce. It was the first major construction plan that really was affirmative action. You have to have on the site, you have to have half of the apprentices and 1/3 of the journeymen. We changed that into something called journeyman trainees, which we can go in later on if you want. That's just a detail. We got involvement in the Model Cities program. We changed the whole Model Cities citizen participation process. And we got the Health Council, which said the hospital, the university hospital, has to be available to take care of people's local needs and not do exotic things like heart transplants, which was the big thing at that time. So again, strategy. You can't just go down there with hundreds of people and expect the same outcome.
So you're saying that as in terms of strategy, you actually had an alternative plan that you put in place. And
Yep.
You were saying you want to do this, but no, here's an alternative that will give you what you want in terms of your plans, right?
Yep.
But it'll avoid the backlash that you're going to get from the community. And there's an additional way to benefit, right, what the community needs. Here are some additional needs and benefits that we can get for the community, especially coming right after the uprisings.
A lot of firsts. And the young men, because they weren't thinking about women at that time, they said, well, we can't find anybody to do the construction. The union said you can't do that. The contractor said we don't have anybody. And we said, well, we're going to train them. We know you don't have anybody because you never let anybody have a chance.
Because you didn't let people in the unions.
Yes, we trained at least 600 people over the course of the years. And most of those young people, up until just recently, worked on any of the projects that were going on because people had to find, because of the new surge and emphasis on affirmative action that followed from that, they had to find Black and brown people to do the work. So those people were on jobs right until they retired. They retired just recently. Now you don't have that pool anymore because at a certain point, the union said to the governor, if you keep supporting that plan and keep taking it to other cities, because we wanted to go to Atlantic City with that whole thing in the early 1970s. If you do that, we will not support you. Well, unfortunately, the mayor Ken Gibson didn't say to the governor at that time, if you want my support, Democratic governor, you will continue to train these people. So the Newark Trades Training Council went default.
So Newark had at one point an actual training council that was funded by the state, that would train hundreds and hundreds of construction workers that would be used in jobs that had to hire Black and brown people.
Yeah. The next place they went was over to the airport, then to Passaic Valley Sewage, and they were getting ready to go to Atlantic City. It was all set up to go to Atlantic City. But again, like I said, the governor didn't approve it, and the mayor blinked.
And what you're talking about is something that could be set up now. Like, does any such thing exist now? That, because you're saying we don't have that many Black construction workers right now.
Right.
Like a lot of that pool, they retired and it was never replaced.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are individual. I think they're smaller projects, but it has to be funded by the state. You can't use foundation money for that because you want to keep it going. So it has to be a steady stream of income. It was all coordinated with the unions. We had teachers coming from the unions. We had something called a review council, which was composed of contractors, unions, the local community people. We had a majority. All of that was part of the agreement, which looked at the site on a periodic basis to see if there was compliance. And if there wasn't, then we expected the college to shut the job down.
So what ended up happening is that you had a program that really did give employment to entire groups of people in Newark, was spread out to different cities in New Jersey. But because of Black political leadership that let it go, and racist white union heads that and a political entity as a governor that they just all were like, nah, it's enough. Too many Black people with jobs. We want to have more of these white people with jobs. It was that raw. It was really that raw, like as in too many Black people having jobs, too many Puerto Ricans having jobs.
I don't think they said it. I don't remember exactly the language that was used, but that was the effect of it. Not only did they get the training and get paid, they got paid while they were being trained. You come out, learn what you're supposed to be doing. You get placed as an apprentice, or if you had some experience already, then you get placed as what was called a journeyman trainee. On the job, you're working, you get paid, You get more experience. For the journeyman trainees, they were getting the time they needed to join the union. Then the next fight was to force them into the union. So yes, we did all of that. That the group that did that was called the Newark Construction Trades Training Corporation.
Now, it seems like you had a widespread support. Like you talked about the initial approach, as in getting people together just to even shut down the original plans for UNDMJ. Then you talked about utilizing resources from Yale. Then you talked about utilizing resources in the community. And it seems like you had the NAACP, which is known as a middle class organization, to the Black Panther organization, which then was like a Marxist organization, all working together. Is that just idealization, or did that really happen?
No, that happened, and I wouldn't say that the Panthers were Marxist, but everything else you said was accurate. It's necessary to build coalitions, and that's why I said you got to have a cohesive approach to this thing, because you're reaching out and you're bringing in people. Some people are your eyes and ears. Some people are your boots on the ground. There's some people who are not going to come to a meeting and listen to folks debate how many angels can you put on the head of a pin. But when it comes to action, they will be there. But you have to have some kind of ability to communicate to each side of that spectrum, just what's going on. And that's what we had in Newark. And that's what I'm proud of in my role to help build that kind of coalition. I wasn't by myself. I had a lot of folks working with me, and I worked with a lot of people. But I learned this stuff, and that's what I try to pass on to the next generation.
How are you able, like, many people who are part of organizations, I'm talking about even now in Newark, argue with one another, their accusations, like if you're not doing this in this particular way, you're a sellout. Like the amount of vitriol, the amount of like attacking one another in these groups seems to be high.
Mm-hmm.
How can we work together when it seems like there are all these tensions pulling us apart? What is some of the things you did that got people who would never talk to each other, wouldn't want to be in the same room, might call each other sellouts?
Mm-hmm.
How were they gotten to be in the same room?
You're talking about the politics of personality. Yes. Well, let me give you an example. We had that in the medical school fight. When we went down to the state building on Raymond Boulevard, and a man named Paul Ilvasacker, who was the governor's first commissioner of, I forget the name of it. Two commissioners were there. One was for higher education and one was for community affairs. So you had Ralph Duncan, you had Paul Ilvasacker. And they were expecting just to have some hearings. And we said, no, we are the negotiating team. And so we had already done the homework in advance. That's key. We had enough people who had bought into this plan so that we knew we would have the majority of the folks saying they are legitimate and they represent us. So when the minorities came along, folks who were paid to interrupt by the then mayor Adnesia, folks who had made a whole living on doing that, including some ministers and some other folks.
And these would be Black people who were paid by Adnesia to break up coalitions?
Oh, these were all Black people. They were paid in one way or another. They were given jobs or other opportunities. So it was in their interest, they felt, to do what the mayor said. And their egos were involved. I'm not up there doing this. Why should I let some other folks do it? Some of those were people too. Some of those people who were objecting to us were not on the mayor's payroll. But their egos might as well have been on the mayor's payroll because they were serving his interests. So when it came time, it was to the benefit of the state's representatives that they try to drive some kind of wedge between us and the folks who were not feeling they were represented. So, that always happens, divide and conquer, but we had already done our homework. So when they rose up when they peeped up and tried to stop us, we had enough people in that room to say, sit down and shut the F up. And that's how it was done.
So you're talking about understanding who your enemies are, understanding that, skin folks ain't kinfolk, and understanding that your numbers just needed to be higher, that you needed to plan for that, because you know that that is generally how power works. They will try to find people who look like you to attack you. Understand who they are and plan around it.
Yeah, so it goes under the headline of know who your enemy is, but also know who your potential friends are and are not. So it's two kinds of studies you're doing. You're looking at what the obvious set of interests are on the other side, but you're looking at also potential allies, and you try to bring them in. You try to bring them under the tent. You try to make the tent big enough so that everybody feels they have a place. And we did that. We had some of the ministers who were not under Amnesio's tent. We knew what they wanted. They wanted to build some houses. New Hope Baptist was one of those. New Hope Baptist, still a big church. And so the minister brought some of his people to these meetings to make sure we stayed together. That meeting and other meetings as well. Now, these were church people. They kind of like filled the seats. They were a little taken aback at some of what was going on. They had never seen anything like that. But I don't know why they were surprised, because the same kind of infighting was going on in the deacon's room every Sunday. So, they couldn't be calling us. But anyway.
So there would be fighting behind closed doors, right? You gather a bunch of people in the room, and you are fighting it out behind closed doors. But that's part of the strategy and part of how you bring people in.
That's how you bring people in. You bring people in. You don't want folks to be fighting. So you try to, like I said, make the tent big enough, and you try to make things productive enough so that everybody feels they have a piece of what you're doing.
Okay, so and thank you for breaking that down, because it just seems like there's the categories of, there are people who you want in the tent. There are people you want as many people as possible, but there's some people are never going to go in. There's some people that
they're not going to accept. Some of these people were not going to accept my leadership. I was young. I knew what I was talking about. I wasn't born in Newark. That's what I got for a while. I got that for a long time. I still get that every now and then, but I ask these people.
Wait, you still get that now?
How old are you? And they tell me they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or something like that. I said, well, wherever I came from, I've been in Newark longer than you have been alive. So I don't want to hear that. No, I don't hear that much. But that's what you have to do. You got to figure out a nice way to bring some humor in on this thing so that everything stays equal.
Okay. And so when you're looking at now, and the advice that you would give for people coming in, and we're quickly running out of the time that we're allotted, but there's so much more, and I definitely want to have another session with you where we could talk about some things, because we never got into the uprisings, because you had an involvement in that as well.
Well, you mean the rebellion?
The rebellions, yes.
I was there. I was a witness. One of the things we did was to take, I was a law student, and I had a team of law students working for me. So we took the depositions of people who saw what the police were doing to folks. There were 3 levels of police: local, state, and federal. So we had all of this information that we turned over to the state. We turned it over to the governor's select commission, and of course nothing happened. None of the people killed were killed by the community. All of them, including 1 cop and 1 fireman, were killed by one branch of the police or another, and no police were ever indicted.
Wow.
700 people were wounded, 767, if I remember correctly. 26 people were killed, and millions of dollars of damage from the fires and destruction.
And no police officer was ever indicted.
Nope.
But you were Why did you? What did you hope to get from, or what did you hope to accomplish by bringing in Yale law students and taking those depositions? Like
Mhm.
at the time, what did you think about? Like, why did you do that?
Your movement has to be multifaceted, and you can't be afraid of people with skill. Too many folks think that the only skill you need to have is how loud your voice is. But I brought in the people from Yale because they knew how to put a plan together. They knew how to plan something that could stop the opposition in its tracks, because they were going to say, well, that doesn't do what we're talking about. It does. Well, what standards did you use? The American Medical Association standards, the same standards you use to develop 150 acres. So, bip, we got them. They can't argue that. So skills are very important, and there were lots of people with lots of different skills, and in all of the movements that I've been involved in Newark, you got to have people with skills. They have to understand that the community, though, is who they're working for, and not the opposite. So I won't allow my technical people to talk down to the community people. They have to respect the community, and that's how we were able to do this.
Hmm. So when you're looking at the protests that are going on now and the types of organizing that people are doing and want to do, what are some of the advice? What is some advice that you would give to them right now? And that's true. Like it doesn't, that's in Portland. That's also places where these federal police forces threatening to go. This is about people who are looking to get involved in some way. There's an election coming. I mean, there are all these things that are going on right now, and there are a lot of kids. There are a lot of younger people who are like, I need to make a difference. How do I do that? What advice would you give to them?
I have two examples of the kind of advice that I would use, and it's also based on strategy. If Trump decides to bring people, these unknown law enforcement people, to Chicago, for example, the people who would ordinarily come out and demonstrate and confront the police, they shouldn't be there. They should be in the neighborhood doing voter registration. And they should point downtown and see, this is what you're going to continue to get if you don't come out and vote and put somebody else in the White House. So that has to be done. And not only that, once you get them registered, you're going to have to take them to the voting polls, have a group of people that's going to stand there with them, because this has to be disciplined, because you're going to have less places to vote and other kinds of hurdles to cross. The second example is something that I've been talking about in Florida. In Florida, the good people of Florida said folks who were felons and who are now out of jail should be able to vote. There's 1 million of folks like that, and of course, most of them are Black and Latino. The problem is then the state legislature comes in, again, I'm talking about a Republican state legislature that the Democrats didn't really organize against properly. The Republican legislature said, well, all right, you got the right to vote, but you got to pay all your fines. So there's about $1 billion worth of fines. My proposal is, and I want everybody out there to listen to this, we should get our people who have some money, the professionals, the lawyers, the doctors, the athletes, the singers, the dancers. We should get all these people, the rap folks. We should get a pool of money and pay for. You can't ask for $1 billion in 3 months, but you can ask for a few $100,000, and you can save some of those people from the roles of the never to vote in their life. If we put 100,000 people on the street who can vote, by the fact that they now have had their fines paid, we can change the color of Florida politically from red to blue.
And that has a special resonance because we know that in 2000 Florida was won by only 400 votes, and so what you're talking about is 100,000 is a strategic way to flip a state.
Absolutely.
If you're talking about that they're getting Trump out of office based on what he's doing in terms of the federal police force. Well, I so want to ask you some more questions. I so want to have you back because this has been very enlightening for me based on the things you've said. I will thank you now and ask you one more question, and we'll end it on that.
Okay.
The last question you ended with voting. And there are a lot of people who say Biden's a former Klansman, or Biden was formerly is a race segregationist. They say that there's no reason to vote. These are two bad choices, and it's better to stay home, not be involved. Be involved in 2024. Like they say the older people made a mistake in choosing Joe Biden. They made a mistake in continuing to support the Democratic Party. What would you say to that?
Well, that's absurd. Joe Biden was not a member of the Klan. He did support the segregationists who wanted to continue to segregate schools. So yes, that is on his record. But he's all we got right now. And if you want to get rid of Trump, you have to play you have to once again play the game of which is the worst. And I get tired of voting for who is the worst. I know a whole lot of other people do. I'm sorry, voting against who is the worst. But I think that Bernie Sanders would have been a better candidate. That's who I voted for in the primary. But we have to get a new person in the White House. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to sit down. It means we're going to have to, again, strategize to get Joe Biden to do the right thing. But that's a form of power right there. To understand, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to walk away. Da, 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 da. So that's what I'm talking about. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. And I very much appreciate you being here. As always, we will have to have you back. And as always, it's an honor to talk to you. So thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. I'll be glad to come back. You asked good questions.
Thank you again.
All right.